The thing nobody tells you about being left to die is how quiet it gets afterward. Not the silence of the planet itself. The planet was never silent. The planet they called Threnody was the loudest dead place in the surveyed galaxy, a world that screamed in every register a human body could register and several it could only feel. No, the quiet I mean is the quiet inside a man when the ship that was supposed to take him home burns its engines and lifts off the regolith and dwindles to a point, and then to nothing. And he understands, standing there in a cracked pressure suit with 11 hours of air, that the people he had bled for have decided his life is worth less than the cargo he was standing next to. That quiet, that is the one nobody warns you about. I have been trying to describe it for a long time now, and the closest I can come is this. It is the sound a man makes inside himself when he finally stops waiting to be saved. My name is Aaron Wells, and this is the account of the 219 days I spent on the planet that was supposed to kill me in 11 hours. I am setting it down because the official record is a lie, and because the men who wrote that lie are still drawing breath and drawing salaries, and because somewhere out there is a young engineer reading a contract from a company with a clean logo and a generous signing bonus. And I would like that young engineer to know what the clean logo is capable of. I am not a writer. I was never a writer. I was a terraforming systems engineer, which is to say I was the man they sent down to the worst places in the universe to make them slightly less likely to murder the colonists who came after. I knew machines. I did not know words, so forgive me if this comes out plain. Plain is what I have. Let me tell you about Threnody first, because to understand what they did to me, and what the planet did to me, and what I became in the long argument between the two, you have to understand the planet. You have to understand that they did not maroon me on a hostile world. They marooned me on the single most hostile body that human beings had ever attempted to set foot on, and they did it on purpose, and they did it with paperwork. Threnody was a terrestrial world about 1 1/3 times the mass of Earth, orbiting a sullen orange star that flared without warning and without mercy. It had an atmosphere, which was the cruel joke of the place, because the atmosphere was thick and dense, and almost breathable in the way that a lie is almost the truth. It was a soup of nitrogen and carbon dioxide and trace sulfur compounds, laced through with a fine suspended particulate of silicate dust so sharp at the microscopic level that a single unfiltered breath would begin sanding the inside of your lungs into scar tissue. The pressure at the surface was high enough to make your joints ache through a suit. The temperature swung 400 degrees between the day side and the night side, and Threnady's day was 60 Earth hours long, which meant you got 30 hours of a heat that could soften the seals on a pressure suit followed by 30 hours of a cold that could shatter them. And then there was the wind. I have stood in front of the great industrial fans they used to test hull integrity and felt them try to peel me off the floor. The wind on Threnody was worse. The dense atmosphere meant the wind had mass, real mass. The wind hit you like water. And when the star flared and dumped energy into that thick air, the whole sky would convulse, and the wind would come across the basalt plains at speeds that did not have a name in any weather report I had ever read, carrying that silicate dust, so that the wind did not merely push you, it cut you. It came across the land like a flood of razors, and it would find every weakness in your suit and your shelter and your resolve, and it would work at them, patiently, the way water works at stone. This was the planet they left me on. I want that understood. When the survey company's lawyers later described my abandonment as an unfortunate logistical decision made under resource constraints, I want it understood that the resource constraint in question was that the lifeboat had room for either me or 4 cargo modules of refined rhodium ore, and that rhodium sold for 900,000 credits a module, and that I did not. The company was called Meridian Deepworld Survey. Their logo was a clean blue circle with a single white line through it, meant to evoke a horizon, a new dawn, the promise of worlds made habitable. I had worked for them for 11 years. I had a commendation from them, an actual physical plaque, for my work stabilizing the atmospheric processors on a colony world called Brightfall where my designs had, the plaque said, saved an estimated 4,000 colonist lives. I kept that plaque on the wall of my quarters aboard the survey vessel Calliope. I mention this because when the order came to leave me behind, the man who gave that order, our expedition commander, a man named Garrett Voss, had signed off on that commendation 2 years earlier. He knew exactly who I was. He knew exactly what I had done. And he weighed me against 4 modules of ore and he found me wanting. And the terrible thing, the thing I have had 219 days and then years beyond them to think about, is that by the arithmetic of his world he was not even wrong. Here is how it happened. I will tell it straight, the way it went, and then I will tell you the other thing, the thing that was happening at the same time far away that I knew nothing about, because this is a story with 2 clocks running in it and you cannot understand the one without the other. But first, the abandonment. First, the 11 hours. We had been on Threnody for 6 weeks, a survey team of 9, assessing the iridium deposits that the orbital scans had promised. Iridium is a catalyst metal, vanishingly rare, essential to the field generators that make faster-than-light travel survivable for human passengers, and Threnody was lousy with it. The whole expedition existed because some orbital telescope had caught the spectral signature of a iridium-rich world and Meridian had calculated that the metal was worth the cost of going to the worst place in the surveyed galaxy to dig it out. We were not there to terraform Threnody. Nobody in their right mind would ever try to terraform Threnody. It was a write-off, a death world, valuable only for what could be ripped out of its crust and carried away. I was there because even a smash-and-grab mining survey needs a terraforming engineer to keep the temporary habitats from being torn apart by the environment, to manage the life support, to be the one who understands the planet well enough to keep it from killing everyone before the ore is secured. That was my job. I kept 8 other people alive on a planet that wanted them dead. For 6 weeks I did it well, and then the star flared. It was the largest flare recorded in the expedition's data, a coronal mass ejection that the Calliope's instruments caught only 40 minutes before it arrived. And 40 minutes is not enough time to do anything on Threnody except be afraid. The flare did 2 things. It dumped a wash of hard radiation across the dayside that would kill an unshielded human in hours, and it pumped enough energy into the atmosphere to spawn a wind event that the meteorological models flatly refused to predict, simply returned errors, because the models had no category for what was coming. The main habitat was on the dayside. The Calliope was in orbit. And the only way off the surface was the single dropship, which had ferried us down in 3 trips and could carry, at maximum, 5 people plus minimal cargo, or fewer people plus more cargo. There were 9 of us on the surface, and 4 modules of refined iridium that we had spent 6 weeks extracting. You can see the shape of the problem already. You are ahead of me. Garrett Voss was ahead of me too. He saw the shape of the problem the instant the flare warning came in, and while the rest of us were still processing the radiation numbers, he had already done the arithmetic, because that was the kind of mind he had, a mind that did arithmetic faster than feeling. 9 people, 1 dropship, 4 modules of ore worth 3.6 million credits, and a company evaluation system that scored every expedition commander on profit and loss, that had passed over Voss for promotion twice, that had made very clear to him in the cold language of corporate performance review that the expeditions which came home rich were the expeditions that advanced a man's career, and the ones that came home safe but poor were the expeditions that ended it. He gathered us in the main habitat as the flare warning counted down. He was calm. I will give him that. He was always calm. It was the quality that had made us trust him, and he used that calm now the way a surgeon uses a steady hand to do a terrible thing precisely. He explained the situation. He explained that the dropship could not carry all 9 of us and the ore in the time remaining before the wind event made flight impossible. He explained that the ore represented the entire value of the expedition, that without it, we would all return having failed, that the company's policy in the event of catastrophic environmental emergency was clear about prioritizing irreplaceable assets. And then he explained that someone would need to stay behind to manage the habitat's emergency systems, to keep the structure intact through the wind event, so that it could function as a shelter, so that a rescue mission, which he assured us, looking at me, would be mounted the moment the Calliope reached a safe distance and could organize a return, would have something to return to. Someone with the engineering expertise to nurse a damaged habitat through a storm that the models could not predict. Someone, in other words, like me. I want to tell you that I saw through it immediately. I did not. That is the truth, and I have made a private vow to tell the truth in this account, no matter how it makes me look. I did not see through it immediately because the story he told was a good story, a plausible story, and it cast me in a role I had spent my whole career playing, the role of the engineer who stays at the post, who keeps the machines running while others get to safety. It flattered the best part of me in order to kill me. That is what I understand now. Voss did not appeal to my fear. He appealed to my pride, to my competence, to my 11 years of being the man who could be relied upon to do the hard, necessary thing. He looked at me and he said, in front of the others, that I was the only one who could keep the habitat alive through the storm, and that the rescue would come, and that it was a matter of days. And I believed him. I picked up my own death sentence and I held it like a commendation. I said I would stay. The others did not meet my eyes. That was the first thing that began, very quietly, to tell me the truth. As the dropship loading proceeded, as the 4 modules of Iridium were strapped into the cargo bay and 4 of my 8 colleagues climbed in beside them, because the dropship could carry 5 with the ore, and Voss took the 4 who were most senior, most useful to the company, leaving behind not just me but 3 others, 3 others whose names I will come to, 3 others who were also being written off and did not yet know it. As all of this happened, none of the ones leaving would look at me. People who are coming back for you look you in the eye. People who are leaving you to die look at the floor. I did not understand yet what their downcast eyes were telling me, but some animal part of me registered it, filed it away, and began, beneath my pride and my belief, to be afraid. The dropship left with Voss, the 4 senior staff, and the ore. 5 people and 3.6 million credits, lifting off the basalt as the sky turned the color of a bruise, and the first outrider gusts of the wind event began to moan across the plain. It rose and it turned, and it burned for orbit, and it was gone. And the quiet I told you about at the beginning settled over me, and I stood at the habitat viewport and watched the place where the dropship had been, and I waited to feel relief that at least the others had gotten away. And instead I felt the first cold finger of the truth touch the back of my neck. Because the arithmetic did not work, I knew the dropship specifications better than almost anyone. I had maintained its life support myself. 5 people and 4 modules of Iridium was at the absolute edge of its capacity for a single ascent to orbit. There was no margin in that load for a second trip. And a second trip would have to be made into the teeth of a wind event that the models could not predict, and that was, even now, building towards something that would make flight not merely dangerous but impossible. Voss knew this. Voss had done this arithmetic before any of us. He had not left me behind to keep the habitat alive for a rescue. He had left me behind because the dropship could not carry 9 and the ore, and he had chosen the ore. And he had needed someone to stay and manage the people he was abandoning, so that those people would not panic and try to rush the dropship. And he had chosen me for that because I was the one they trusted, because my staying made the abandonment look orderly, look planned, look like anything other than what it was. I was not the only one left behind. I had not understood that at first either, in the chaos of the loading. There were 4 of us on the surface when the dropship vanished. Myself and 3 others, and let me tell you their names now because they matter. Because what happened among the 4 of us in the days that followed is the part of this story that I have never been able to tell without stopping, without putting it down and walking away and coming back. There was Mara Lindqvist, a geologist, 34 years old, who had found the richest of the iridium veins and who had therefore made the company more money than anyone else on the expedition, and who had been left behind anyway, which tells you everything about how the company valued the people who created its value. There was Daniel Cho, a medic, 29, quiet, devout in a private way he never pushed on anyone, who had volunteered for deep survey work to pay for his sister's medical treatment back home. And there was Theodore Ackafer, whom everyone called Teddy, the oldest of us at 58, a drilling specialist who had been doing this work since before the company existed under its current name, who had a wife and 2 grown children, and a plot of land on a green colony world that he talked about constantly, the land he was going to retire to, the orchard he was going to plant. 4 of us, left on Threnody with a habitat designed to shelter 9 for 6 weeks, which sounds like a surplus until you understand that the habitat depended on regular resupply of certain consumables that we did not have, and on a power system that the wind event was about to test beyond its rated tolerances, and on the continued structural integrity of a building that was about to be hit by the strongest storm in the recorded history of the planet. We had, by my initial calculation, 11 hours before the habitat's compromised systems would fail. 11 hours of certainty, and after that, whatever I could buy with my hands and my mind and my refusal to lie down. I am going to tell you what happened in those 11 hours and in the 219 days that followed. But I told you this story has 2 clocks, and before I go on I have to start the other clock, the one that was running far away, aboard the Calliope and then beyond it, because the cruelty of what was done to me has a second half that I did not learn until much later, and you should carry it with you as you read about my survival, the way I now carry it, the knowledge of what they were doing and saying up there while I was down here fighting to stay alive. While I stood at the viewport watching the dropship vanish, Garrett Voss was already composing his report. I have read that report since. It became a piece of evidence, eventually, in proceedings I will come to. It is a masterpiece of a certain kind of writing, the kind that says a true thing in service of a total lie. The report stated, accurately, that an unpredicted catastrophic flare event had generated a wind storm of unprecedented severity. It stated, accurately, that the dropship had been forced to evacuate with maximum priority cargo and senior personnel. It stated, accurately, that 4 members of the survey team had remained on the surface to maintain critical habitat systems. And then it stated, as fact, that the habitat had been destroyed in the wind event with the total loss of all 4 remaining personnel, and that no rescue had been possible due to the ongoing storm and the catastrophic nature of the structural failure. He wrote that we were dead. He wrote it on day 1, while I was still alive, while all 4 of us were still alive, because writing that we were dead was cleaner than writing that we had been abandoned. A rescue mission costs money and carries risk. 4 dead employees cost a death benefit and a paragraph of regret. Voss did the arithmetic, as he always did, and the arithmetic said that the cheapest thing to do with the 4 people he had left on Threnody was to declare them already dead and never come back to find out whether it was true. And the Calliope's crew, the senior staff he had saved, the 4 who had ridden up with the oar, they signed it. Every one of them. They put their names to the document that said we had died in a storm, because to dispute it would have been to admit they had climbed into a dropship and left 4 living colleagues to die. And it is astonishing. It is one of the things I have learned that I most wish I had not learned. How easy it is for a frightened person to sign a lie that lets them keep believing they are good. They told themselves the storm probably did kill us. They told themselves there was nothing to be done. They told themselves that disputing the report would not bring us back and would only destroy their own careers. And all of this was true. Every word of it was true, and it added up to a lie, and they signed it. And the Calliope turned for home carrying 3.6 million credits in Iridium and 4 murders dressed up as an act of God. That is the other clock. That is what was happening up there. Now let me tell you what was happening down here, where I was not dead, where none of us were dead, where 4 abandoned people were about to discover what human beings are actually made of when the arithmetic has written them off. The first 11 hours were engineering. Pure, desperate, beautiful engineering. And I say beautiful without apology, because those 11 hours were the first time in my life I understood what I was for. The habitat was failing on 3 fronts, and I had to triage. The power system was the most urgent. The wind-driven dust was abrading the external thermal radiators, and as they degraded, the system was losing its ability to shed heat, which meant the reactor would have to throttle down to avoid overheating, which meant we would lose power, which meant we would lose the heaters and the air recyclers and everything else that stood between us and a planet that would kill us in minutes. I could not save the radiators. So I did the thing that engineering is actually about, which is not saving everything but choosing what to lose. I rerouted the habitat's heat into the regolith itself, ran the thermal exchange lines down into the basalt beneath us, and used the planet that was trying to kill us, as a heat sink. It should not have worked. The thermal models said the basalt would saturate and reflect the heat back within hours. But the wind event had a strange gift hidden inside its violence. The storm was stripping heat from the surface so ferociously that my saturated basalt kept getting scoured cool, and the planet that was murdering us became, by an irony I have never stopped marveling at, the thing that kept us alive. That was the first lesson Threnody taught me in those first 11 hours, and it became the lesson the whole rest of my survival was built on. The planet was not my enemy. The planet was not anything. The planet was a system, vast and violent and utterly indifferent, and a system can be understood, and anything that can be understood can be used. Voss had left me to die because he thought of Threnody as a death sentence, a thing that would simply kill us and save him the trouble. But Threnody was not a death sentence. Threnody was a machine, and I was an engineer. The 11 hours became 20. The 20 became 40. The wind event, the storm that the models said would peak and break the habitat, peaked and did not break the habitat, because I had spent those first hours doing nothing but anticipating where it would attack and bracing those points, welding extra bracing across the structural members that my analysis said would fail first, sealing the micro breaches where the dust was forcing its way in, and when the storm hit its full strength, the full strength that the Calliope's instruments had recorded from orbit before they wrote us off, the habitat groaned and screamed and flexed and held. It held because I held it. The 4 of us survived the storm that the official report said had killed us, survived it by hours of work and then by simply enduring. The 4 of us pressed together in the habitat's central core while the world outside roared. And when it finally passed, when the wind dropped from impossible to merely lethal, and the dust settled enough to see the bruised sky again, we were alive. All 4 of us. Abandoned, declared dead, 3.6 million credits and 5 colleagues lighter and alive. And that was when the real test began, because surviving the storm had been a matter of hours, and what we faced now was a matter of months, and months is a different kind of enemy than hours. Hours you can fight with adrenaline and expertise. Months you have to fight with something else, something I did not know I had, something the 4 of us had to build between us out of nothing. Let me tell you about those 4 people now, properly, because they are the heart of this, and because 3 of them are not here to tell it themselves. In the first days after the storm we took stock, and the stock was grim. The habitat was intact but the consumables were finite. We had air recycling, which was the main thing. The recyclers could scrub our carbon dioxide and crack oxygen from stored reserves, and from the water we had. but the system needed replacement filter media on a schedule, and we had perhaps 60 days of media before the scrubbing efficiency would begin to fall. We had food for 4 people for roughly 90 days if we were careful, and we were going to be very careful. We had water, recycled in a closed loop that lost a little to inefficiency each cycle, enough for many months if nothing broke. And we had power, my jury-rigged thermal system humming along, drawing the planet's own violence into a fragile equilibrium that I had to monitor and adjust constantly, because the equilibrium was not stable. It was a thing I was holding in place by main force of attention, a plate spinning on a stick that would fall the moment I stopped spinning it. 60 days of filter media. That was the number that mattered. That was the wall we were running toward. In 60 days, the air would begin to turn, and after that we would be slowly poisoning ourselves with our own breath, and there was no resupply coming, because we were dead, because Garrett Voss had written that we were dead, and the Calliope had carried that lie home and no one was coming. No one would ever come, because you do not mount a rescue for people you have already buried on paper. We did not know about the report then. We still believed in those first days that a rescue was coming. That belief was the thing that kept Teddy going in particular. He talked about it constantly, the rescue, how long it would take the Calliope to reach a relay station, how long to organize a return, how we needed to just hold on, just hold the line, just survive until they came back for us. He had a wife. He had children. He had an orchard he was going to plant. He could not allow himself to believe that no one was coming, because to believe that was to believe he would never see any of it again. And so he believed in the rescue with a fierceness that was really just love wearing the mask of optimism. And I let him believe it. I had already started to suspect the truth, had already done the dropship arithmetic and felt the cold finger on my neck, but I looked at Teddy talking about his orchard and I did not have it in me to take the rescue away from him. So I lied. By silence I lied. I let him believe. Mara was the one who said it out loud first. Mara, the geologist, who had found the iridium, who had made them their fortune and been left behind for her trouble. She was a hard, precise, unsentimental woman, and about a week in, when Teddy was doing his rescue arithmetic again at the evening meal, she put down her ration and she said flatly that no one was coming. She said it the way she would have reported a mineral assay. She laid out the dropship capacity, the storm, the timeline, the company's policies, and she arrived at the conclusion I had already reached and had been too cowardly to voice, which was that we had not been left behind to be rescued. We had been left behind to be forgotten, and that the only people who were going to get us off Threnody were ourselves. It nearly broke us, her saying that. Teddy stood up and walked away from the table and stood at the viewport with his back to us, his shoulders shaking, and Daniel went to him. Daniel the medic, the quiet, devout young man, and put a hand on the old man's back and said nothing, just stood with him. And I sat at the table with Mara and felt the rescue die in the room, felt all of us let go of it together, and it was the worst moment of the whole 219 days, worse than anything the planet did to us. Because it was the moment we understood we were alone. And then something happened that I have spent years trying to understand, and that I think is the real reason I am writing this account, because it is the thing that the official report could never have predicted and that Garrett Voss with his arithmetic could not have factored in, because it does not appear in any arithmetic. What happened was that having let go of the rescue, having accepted that we were alone and forgotten and written off, the 4 of us did not give up. We did the opposite. Mara turned from the viewport and she looked at me and she said, "All right then, engineer. If no one is coming, then tell us how we get ourselves off this rock." And I realized she was not despairing. She was reporting the situation so that we could begin to solve it. She had taken away the false hope so that we could start building a real one. That was the night the 4 of us stopped being victims and started being something else. I have to be careful here, because this is the part of the story that the format I am writing in wants to make into something triumphant and simple, And it was not triumphant, and it was not simple. We did not suddenly become heroes. We became four terrified people doing arithmetic of our own, except our arithmetic was different from Voss's, because Voss's arithmetic had only one variable in it, which was money, and ours had a different variable in it, which was each other. That was the whole difference. That was everything. Voss looked at four human beings and a pile of ore, and the ore weighed more. We looked at each other and did a different sum, and in our sum each of us was infinite, and you cannot abandon an infinity to save a finite thing. The arithmetic forbids it. And so we did not abandon each other, not once, not in 219 days, not even at the end when abandoning each other would have meant survival for the one who did the abandoning. Here is what we worked out that night and in the nights after. We could not be rescued, so we had to be found, and to be found we had to be detectable, and to be detectable across interstellar distances from a planet everyone believed was a tomb. We needed to do something that no natural process and no dead habitat could do. We needed to send a signal. Not a distress beacon. The habitat's beacon was short range, line of sight to orbit, useless with no one in orbit to hear it. We needed something that could be seen from another star system. And the only thing we had that could possibly be seen across that kind of distance was the one thing the planet had in terrible abundance, the one thing that had nearly killed us and that I had already learned to use, which was energy. The storms, the flares, the vast violent energy budget of Threnody itself. Mara was the one who saw it because she was a geologist and she thought in terms of planetary systems. She said, the Ridium, the reason we are here, the reason they left us. Ridium is a catalyst. It interacts with field energy. It has a spectral signature that every survey telescope in human space is calibrated to detect, because detecting Ridium is how you find worlds worth mining. What if, she said, we could put Ridium into the upper atmosphere during a flare event? What if we could seed the sky with the one substance that every telescope pointed at this region was already looking for, and let the flare energy excite it, and create a spectral flare so anomalous, so artificial, so wrong, that any survey instrument that caught it would have to investigate? We would not be sending a message anyone could read. We would be sending a message that said only one thing, but said it unmistakably. Something here is not natural. Something here is doing something that should not be possible. Come and see. It was insane. It was beautiful. It was the kind of idea that only four people with nothing left to lose and everything left to fight for could have had. And the reason it was even thinkable was that we had Ridium. Not much. Voss had taken the refined modules, the valuable ones. But the extraction site still had its tailings, its residue, the lower-grade material that had not been worth refining, and Mara knew where it was, and there was enough of it, she calculated, if we could get it into the sky at the right moment, to make Threnody scream in a frequency that human telescopes were built to hear. The problem was getting it into the sky. And here is where it became my problem, the engineer's problem, and where the next 60 days of our lives took their shape. Because the answer to how you get Ridium into the upper atmosphere of a planet during a flare event is that you build something to put it there. And we had to build that something out of a dying habitat and a wrecked extraction site and our 4 pairs of hands against a clock that was counting down our air. I am going to compress the next part because the day-to-day of it was 60 days of grinding labor, and I could fill 100 pages with the engineering and you would put this account down. And I need you not to put it down. I need you to reach the end. So understand only this. We built a launcher, not a rocket. We had no rocket. We built something cruder and stranger, a kind of electromagnetic mass driver, using the habitat's power system and the superconducting coils from the extraction equipment. A rail that could fling a canister of Ridium tailings up through the dense atmosphere high enough and fast enough that, when it reached the thin upper air, it would burst and disperse. And if we timed the burst to coincide with a flare, the flare's energy would do the rest, would light our scattered Ridium up like a flare of our own. A beacon made of the very metal they had killed us for. The building of it nearly killed all of us several times. We had to go outside, into the wind and the dust and the radiation, to salvage the coils and lay the rail, and every excursion outside cost us suit integrity and filter media and our own body's reserves. The planet fought us for every meter of that rail. Daniel, the medic, kept us alive through the excursions, managing our radiation exposure, treating the dust abrasions that the suits could not entirely prevent, rationing the medical supplies with the same desperate care we rationed everything. And it was Daniel who first began to cough. I need to tell you about the coughing, because the coughing is where the story turns from a story about engineering into a story about something harder. The filter media was failing faster than we had projected. The storm had loaded the habitat's air with more silicate dust than the system was designed to handle, and the dust was clogging the filters, and the filters were the one consumable we could not manufacture or salvage or engineer our way around. By day 40, not day 60 as we had hoped, the scrubbing efficiency had begun to fall, and the first sign of it was a fine persistent dust in the habitat air, too fine to see but not too fine to breathe, and the first of us to feel it was Daniel, because Daniel had spent the most time outside, had taken the most exposure, had the most compromised lungs, and Daniel began to cough. We all knew what it meant. We were all engineers and scientists and medics. We all understood that the cough was the sound of silicate scarring beginning in a human lung, the same process that the planet performed on anyone who breathed it unfiltered, only slower, attenuated by the failing filters, a slow-motion version of the death the planet had always intended for us. And we understood that it would come for all of us in order of our exposure, that Daniel was simply first, that the failing air would scar all our lungs eventually, that even if we finished the launcher and fired it and seeded the sky and were detected, the rescue, if it came, would take weeks or months to arrive, and that we did not have weeks or months of breathable air left. This was the moment that Garrett Voss's arithmetic finally caught up with us. Not the storm, not the cold, not the radiation, the air, the slow failing of the air. We had outfought everything the planet threw at us in the open, every dramatic violence, and we were going to be killed by the quietest thing of all, by the simple gradual failure of the filters, by the dust we could not see, accumulating in our lungs breath by breath while we worked. And here is what we did about it, and this is the part I have never been able to tell without stopping, so forgive me if it comes out broken. We did the arithmetic, of course we did. We were people who lived by arithmetic, all four of us, and now we faced the same kind of arithmetic that Voss had faced, the terrible arithmetic of finite resources and more people than the resources could sustain. The filter media that remained could keep the air breathable for 4 people for perhaps 20 more days. The launcher needed at least 30 more days of work to complete. The arithmetic was as plain as the arithmetic Voss had done in the habitat, with the flare warning counting down. There were not enough resources for everyone to survive long enough to finish the thing that might save anyone. But we did a different sum than Voss did. That is the whole of it. That is the thing I most need you to understand, the thing this entire account exists to say. We faced the same arithmetic, and we did a different sum, because Voss's sum had asked who is worth saving and our sum asked what are we willing to give, and those are not the same question. They are opposite questions, and the answer to the second question is the thing that makes us human, and the willingness to ask only the first is the thing that makes a man write that 4 living people are dead so he does not have to go back for them. Teddy went first. Teddy, the oldest, the drilling specialist, the man with the wife and the orchard. He did the arithmetic before any of us said it aloud, the same way Mara had done the rescue arithmetic before any of us could face it, and he came to me one night while the others slept, and he told me, quietly, that the filters would last longer with fewer people breathing through them. He told me that he was 58 years old and had lived a full life, and had an orchard he would never plant and had made his peace with that, and that the launcher needed 30 days and the air would last 20 for 4 but would last 30 for 3, and that the arithmetic was the arithmetic, and that he was not going to let 3 young people die so that an old man could breathe 20 days of poisoned air and then die anyway. I argued with him for hours. I will not pretend I found the words to refute him, because there were no words to refute him. The arithmetic was real, the air was real, and one of us breathing it was the difference between the launcher being finished and not. But I argued anyway, because the thing I had learned on Threnody, the thing that separated us from Voss, was precisely the refusal to let arithmetic have the final word, and I was not going to let it have Teddy. I told him we would find another way. I told him I would re-engineer the scrubbers, stretch the media, that I would solve it, that solving the unsolvable was what I was for. And Teddy looked at me with great kindness, the kindness of a man who has already decided, and he said, "Aaron, you cannot engineer your way out of this one. There is no clever trick. There is only the arithmetic, and the only variable in it that any of us controls is how many of us are breathing." And then he said the thing that I have carried every day since. He said, "You keep telling us the planet is just a machine, that anything that can be understood can be used. Well, I understand it now, and I am going to use it." I did not understand what he meant until the next day, when he was gone. He had gone out in the night, while we slept in his pressure suit out into the dust and the dark, and he had walked away from the habitat, out onto the basalt plain, and at some point he had opened his suit to the planet, and the planet had done what the planet did quickly, the dense razored air, and he had used himself, used his own death, used the one variable he controlled to buy us 10 more days of air. He left a message in the habitat log. It was very short. It said 3 breathe longer than 4, finish the launcher, plant something green for me wherever you end up. And it was signed with his name, Theodore Acaffer, and beneath his name he had written the coordinates of his land on the green colony world, the orchard he had never planted, as if to say, this was real, this place was real, I was going to go there, and now you must carry it for me. We did not have time to grieve him. That is the obscenity of survival, that it does not permit grief, that grief is a luxury of people with breathable air and a future, and we had neither. We had 10 more days, his 10 days, the days he had bought with his life, and we had a launcher to finish, and so we finished it. The 3 of us. Mara and Daniel and I, working in Teddy's 10 days, working through the grief we could not stop to feel, building the thing that might let his sacrifice mean something, because the only thing worse than what Teddy had done would have been to waste it. Daniel was coughing harder now. His exposure had been the worst, and the failing air was finding the damage first in him, and by the time the launcher was nearly complete, he was coughing blood, fine threads of it, and he and I and Mara all understood that he was dying, that the silicate scarring had passed some threshold in his lungs, and that he was not going to be saved by any rescue now, that even if the launcher worked and the signal was seen and a ship came, it would not come in time for Daniel. And Daniel understood this most clearly of all, because Daniel was the medic. Daniel could read his own lungs and the sound of his own breathing, and Daniel made the same choice Teddy had made, but he made it differently because Daniel was different. Daniel did not walk out into the dark. Daniel stayed and worked, and used the days he had left to finish the launcher with us, and when the launcher was complete and we were waiting for the flare that would let us fire it, the flare that the long-period prediction said was coming, Daniel sat with us in the failing air, and he did the thing that he, specifically, had to give. He was a medic. He had medical supplies, including the sedatives and the painkillers that a medic carries, the controlled substances that ease suffering, and he gathered them, all of them, and he gave them to Mara and to me, and he told us to keep them, because when the end came, however it came, whether the launcher worked or not, whether rescue came or not, no one in that habitat should have to meet the end of the air without something to ease it. He had been rationing the medical supplies as carefully as we rationed everything. Now he gave them away, his entire pharmacy, the whole of his power to ease pain. He placed it in our hands and he kept none for himself. And when I understood what he was doing, that he was giving away his own future relief so that we would have ours, I could not speak. He died 4 days before the flare. He died in his sleep in the last of the night, with Mara holding one hand and me holding the other, and his breathing simply slowed and thinned and stopped, and the medic who had kept us all alive went out as gently as he had lived. And his last words, a day before, not even to us, almost to himself, had been a few words of the private faith he had never pushed on anyone, a few words about light, and we let him have them. We did not intrude on them. We let Daniel Cho meet his end inside the thing that had sustained him, and then he was gone, and there were two. Mara and I fired the launcher into the flare. The flare came on schedule, the great long-period flare that Mara's geology and my engineering had together predicted. And as the star convulsed, and the sky began to bruise, and the wind began to rise, we fired the launcher we had built out of a dying habitat and 2 dead men's sacrifices. And the canister of iridium tailings rode our electromagnetic rail up through the dense atmosphere, up past the dust, up into the thin, high air where it burst exactly as designed, and scattered the catalyst metal across the upper sky just as the flare's energy washed over it, and Threnody screamed. I do not have a better word. The spectral signature that bloomed across the upper atmosphere of Threnody in that moment was a scream, an artificial, impossible shriek of excited iridium in a pattern that no natural process could produce, a flare within the flare, a beacon that said to anything watching, "This is wrong, this is made, this is a hand reaching up out of a dead world, come and see, come and see, come and see." We could not see it ourselves, not really. We saw the launch and the flare, and then we were back inside the habitat fighting to keep the structure alive through the wind. But the instruments caught the upper atmosphere signature, and Mara read it, and she turned to me with tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face, and she said, "It worked. Whatever happens now, it worked." We screamed loud enough. "Someone will hear." And then we waited, the two of us in the failing air, to find out whether anyone had. I have to start the other clock again now, the faraway clock, because while Mara and I waited in the dying habitat, the scream we had sent into the sky was crossing the light years, and it was about to arrive somewhere, and where it arrived and who heard it is the part of the story that turns everything that came before it. The signal was caught, as Mara had calculated it would be, by a survey telescope. But it was not a meridian telescope. It was an independent scientific array, an academic instrument operated by a deep space astronomy consortium that had no connection to Meridian Deep World Survey and no stake in the lie that Garrett Voss had told. The array caught the anomalous iridium signature from Threnody, and the astronomers who studied it did exactly what Mara had bet they would do. They could not explain it, and a thing that cannot be explained is the most irresistible thing in the universe to a scientist, and they investigated. They pulled the records on Threnody. They found a Meridian Survey expedition, recently concluded, with a filed report stating that the planet had been surveyed for iridium, and that 4 personnel had been lost in a storm and the habitat destroyed. And they found a contradiction that they could not let go of, because the report said the habitat had been destroyed. And the signal they were looking at, the impossible artificial iridium scream, could only have been produced by a functioning power system and a deliberate engineered launch. Dead habitats do not seed the upper atmosphere with catalyst metal during flares. Someone alive had made that signal. Someone alive, on a planet where 4 people were officially dead, had reached up out of the grave and screamed. The consortium did not have a ship that could reach Threnody quickly, but they had something almost as powerful, which was the truth, and they had no reason to suppress it, and they made it public. They published the anomaly. They published the contradiction between Meridian's report of a destroyed habitat and the evidence of a living, functioning, signaling presence on the surface. They asked publicly, in the cold, neutral language of science, how a destroyed habitat with no survivors had produced an engineered atmospheric signal, and they directed the question at Meridian Deep World Survey, and they did it in a forum that Meridian could not control. I learned all of this later. I learned how the question landed at Meridian like a bomb, how the company's first instinct was to deny, to suggest equipment malfunction, natural anomaly, anything, and how the consortium's astronomers, who were very good at their jobs and now very interested, methodically dismantled every alternative explanation until the only one left standing was the one Meridian most needed to bury, which was that there were people alive on Threnody, people the company had reported dead, people the company had abandoned. I learned how the lie that Voss had told to save money became, the moment it was exposed, the most expensive lie in the company's history, because a company can survive an accident, but a company cannot easily survive the revelation that it abandoned living employees and declared them dead to avoid the cost of rescue. I learned how the 4 senior staff who had signed the false report began, very quickly, to remember things differently, to recall that they had not been certain we were dead, to suggest that perhaps the report had been premature, to position themselves, each of them as far as possible from Garrett Voss, who found himself, very suddenly, alone, the way he had left me alone, holding a lie the way he had made me hold my death sentence. But all of that was far away and later. In the dying habitat on Threnody, Mara and I knew none of it. We knew only that we had fired our scream into the sky and that we were running out of air, and that even if someone had heard us, even if a rescue was now being organized across the light years, it would take time, weeks at the least, and we did not have weeks. We had, by my final desperate calculation, perhaps 8 days of breathable air left for 2 people. Daniel's 10 days and Teddy's 10 days and all our rationing had bought us a great deal, but the math had finally run out of room, and 8 days was not enough for any rescue to reach us, and Mara and I sat in the failing air with Daniel's gift of sedatives between us and faced the last arithmetic. And here, at the very end, Mara did the thing that I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. She did the arithmetic out loud, the way she always had, flat and precise, the geologist reporting the assay. 8 days of air for 2, 16 days of air for 1. The rescue, if it was coming, was at least 3 weeks out, probably more. 2 people could not survive 16 days short of 3 weeks. But one person, breathing alone, stretching 16 days, with every trick of rationing and every reduction of activity and every gift the other could give, one person might, just might, close enough of the gap that a fast rescue could reach them in time. The arithmetic was the same arithmetic Teddy had done and Daniel had done. There was one variable any of us controlled. And Mara controlled it, and she used it, and she did it the way she did everything, without drama, without permitting me to argue, because she had learned from watching me fail to argue Teddy out of it that there was no argument. There was only the arithmetic and the love that chose what to do with it. She told me I was the one who had to live, not because I mattered more. She was very clear about that. She said it plainly. She said this is not about worth. None of this was ever about worth. That was Voss's question, and we do not ask Voss's question. She said I had to live because I was the engineer, because keeping a single person alive in a failing habitat for 3 weeks would require constant engineering, constant adjustment of the systems, the plate spinning that only I knew how to do, and that if she stayed and I went into the dark, then the habitat would fail and we would both have died for nothing. But if I stayed and she gave me her share of the air, then there was a chance, a real chance, that one of us would live to tell what had been done to us. To tell about Teddy and his orchard and Daniel and his light, to make sure that the 4 people Meridian had written off did not stay written off, did not stay a paragraph of regret in a false report, but became instead a thing the company could not survive. That was her arithmetic. One of us had to live to tell it, and the one who could keep the habitat alive was me, and so the one who would walk into the dark was her. I will not tell you the details of our last hours together, because they are mine and they are hers, and they are the one thing in this whole account that I am going to keep. I will tell you only that she did not walk out into the dust the way Teddy had. She let me give her Daniel's gift, the sedatives, the easing, so that she did not have to meet the planet's violence, so that she could go gently, the way Daniel had gone, and I held her hand the way she had held Daniel's, and she was not afraid, or if she was afraid she did not show it to me. She showed me instead the same flat, precise courage she had shown from the first night when she took away our false hope so that we could build a real one. Her last words to me were an instruction because she was Mara to the end. She said, "Keep the habitat alive, tell them what they did, and plant something green for Teddy, for Daniel, for me. Plant something green." And then Daniel's gift took her gently, and her hand went still in mine, and there was one. There was me. Aaron Wells, terraforming systems engineer, alone in a dying habitat on the most hostile planet in the surveyed galaxy, with the air of 2 people now to breathe and 3 graves to carry, and a scream still hanging in the upper atmosphere, waiting to find out whether anyone was coming. I kept the habitat alive for 19 days. 19 days, alone, spinning the plate, adjusting the thermal exchange, stretching the filters, rationing the air that Mara had given me and Daniel before her, and Teddy before him. 3 people's share of air and life, keeping 1 man breathing while a rescue I did not know was coming across the dark toward me. I talked to them in those 19 days. I am not ashamed to say it. I talked to Teddy about his orchard, and to Daniel about his light, and to Mara about the assay, the arithmetic, the cold, precise courage of her, and they did not answer, of course they did not answer, but talking to them kept me on the right side of the line, kept me from doing the only thing that would have made their sacrifices meaningless, which was to give up, to stop spinning the plate, to let the habitat fail and join them in the dark. I did not give up. I had been given too much to give up. 3 people had done their arithmetic, and every one of them had solved for my survival, and to waste that would have been a kind of murder, the murder of everything they had chosen to be, and I would not do it. So I kept the habitat alive. 19 days. On the 19th day, the consortium ship reached orbit. It was not a Meridian ship. That was the last gift the universe gave me, that the ship which came was not the company's. The public exposure of the contradiction, the impossible signal from the supposedly dead planet, had moved faster than I could have imagined, and the astronomy consortium, unwilling to wait for Meridian to organize a rescue, it clearly did not want to organize, had partnered with a deep space emergency service, and sent their own vessel, fast, ahead of any Meridian involvement, because they wanted to know what was on Threnody. They wanted to find the hand that had reached up out of the grave. And they found me. They found 1 man alive in a habitat that the official record said had been destroyed 7 months earlier. 1 man and 3 graves, and a launcher built out of salvage, and a log full of the names of the dead. 1 survivor of an abandonment that the company had dressed up as an act of God. And they brought me up out of the dust and the dark and the dying air. And the planet that was supposed to kill me in 11 hours let me go after 219 days. And I was alive. I was alive, and the lie was dead. I will not spend long on what came after, because the after is less important than the during, and because the during is the part that Teddy and Daniel and Mara paid for, and that I owe it to them to make the center of this. But you deserve to know how it ended, the faraway clock, the other half of the cruelty, so I will tell you quickly. Garrett Voss was finished. The contradiction that the consortium had exposed could not survive my return. A living survivor and 3 documented graves and a habitat log that recorded everything, every sacrifice, every choice, the whole true story written down in the words of the people who lived it. All of this landed on a company that had told the world we were dead, and the company did what companies do when a lie becomes too expensive, which was to find a single person to blame and to feed him to the proceedings in the hope of saving itself. They fed them Voss. The same 4 senior staff who had signed his false report testified now that Voss had pressured them, that they had had doubts, that they had been afraid. They sold him to save themselves exactly as he had sold me to save the ore, and I watched it happen with a feeling that I expected to be satisfaction, and that turned out instead to be a kind of weary recognition, because it was the same arithmetic again, the same question Voss had asked, who is worth saving, and they answered it the same way he had, by saving themselves and abandoning the man beside them, and I understood, watching them, that the thing that had nearly killed me was not one bad man, but a way of doing arithmetic, a way of asking the question, and that the way of asking the question was everywhere, was in the clean blue logo and the generous signing bonus, and the performance review that scored a man on profit and loss, and that Voss was not the disease but only a symptom, the place where the disease had become visible. He was held responsible. There were penalties, professional and financial and eventually legal. He never went to prison. Men like Voss rarely do. But he never commanded another expedition, never signed another report, and the last I heard of him he was a diminished man living on a diminished pension. And I find that I do not think about him very much, which is its own kind of victory, because for a long time I thought about him constantly, and then one day I did not, because I had finally understood that the story was never about him. The story was about Teddy and Daniel and Mara. Voss was just the arithmetic. They were the answer to it. The company paid. Not enough. It is never enough. But they paid settlements to Teddy's wife and children, to Daniel's sister whose medical treatment had been the reason he was there at all, to the families of the dead and to me, the living, and I took the money, and I did the only thing with it that made any sense, the only thing that honored the instruction that all 3 of them had given me, the instruction that was the last word of every one of them. Plant something green. I bought Teddy's land. The coordinates were in the log, the green colony world, the plot where he was going to plant his orchard, and I bought it, and I went there and I planted it. An orchard. Apple and pear and the strange hardy fruit trees that grow on colony worlds, rows of them, on the land that Theodore Acaffer talked about every day on the worst planet in the galaxy, and never lived to see. I planted it for him, and I planted a grove beside it for Daniel, and I named the grove for the light he spoke of at the end, and I planted a garden of hard, precise alpine things for Mara, the geologist, who would have wanted something that grew in stone, and I tend them now, all of them, the orchard and the grove and the garden, on a green world under a kind sun, and they grow. I am an old man now, telling this. The 219 days were a long time ago. I never went back to deep space engineering. I could not. The thing that Threnody taught me made it impossible to go back to working for the clean blue logos, and anyway I had an orchard to tend. I have spent the years since trying to understand what happened to me on that planet, what it meant, why 3 people chose to die so that one could live, and I think I have finally arrived at something like an answer, and I am going to set it down here at the end, because it is the only thing I really have to give you, the young engineer with the contract in your hand, the only thing worth the price that was paid to teach it to me. They left me to die on the most hostile planet alive, and they did not expect what came next, and what came next was not that I survived, although I did survive. What came next was that 4 abandoned people, faced with exactly the same arithmetic that the company had used to abandon them, refused to solve it the same way. The company asked who is worth saving and answered with a number. We asked what are we willing to give and answered with our lives. And the difference between those 2 questions is the whole of it, is everything I learned, is the only thing I know now that I did not know before Threnody. The arithmetic is real. The resources are finite. The math that Voss did was not wrong. There really was not enough air. There really was not enough room in the dropship. The universe really is a place of brutal scarcity where there is often not enough to save everyone. All of that is true. The planet taught me that the planet does not care, that scarcity is real, that the math is the math. And then the people on the planet taught me the other thing, the thing that is not in any arithmetic and that no company will ever put in any report, which is that when the math says someone has to die, you do not get to choose who based on who is worth more, because no one is worth more. That question is the disease. That question is Voss. That question is the clean blue logo weighing a man against 4 modules of ore. When the math says someone has to die, the only human answer, the only answer that does not make you into the thing that abandoned us, is to ask not who is worth saving but who is willing to give, and to honor the ones who give by surviving, by remembering, by telling the truth, and by planting something green. That is what came next. That is the thing they did not expect. They expected a death world to do their killing for them and absolve them of the arithmetic. They did not expect that 4 people on a death world would do a different sum, and that the different sum would reach up out of the grave in a scream of excited ridium, and pull the truth into the sky where it could not be buried, and that one man would come home carrying 3 names and plant them in green earth under a kind sun, where they grow, where they are growing now, where they will go on growing long after the company and its logo and its arithmetic are forgotten. They left him to die on the most hostile planet alive. What came next was that he learned how to live, and who taught him, and what it cost, and he has spent every day since trying to be worth the cost, and on the good days in the orchard, with the trees that Teddy never saw heavy with fruit, and the grove that holds Daniel's light, and the hard, bright garden that is so exactly Mara. On the good days he thinks that maybe, a little, he has been. The orchard is in blossom as I write this. It happens once a year on this world, all at once, the whole orchard going white and pink in a single week, and when it happens I walk out among the trees in the morning when the kind sun is low and I tell them. I tell Teddy his orchard bloomed. I tell Daniel the light came back, the way he said it would. I tell Mara the assay came good, the ground held, the thing she sent into the sky was heard. And then I stand there in the falling blossom on the green world they bought for me with their lives, and I keep the promise that was the last word of every one of them, the promise that is the only thing I have ever found that is larger than the arithmetic, larger than the scarcity, larger than the clean blue logo and everything it weighs and finds wanting. I plant something green. I plant something green and it grows, and that is what came next, and that is the whole of what I have to tell.